little technical difficulty beginning. Okay, so now I'm recording. Welcome to class again. What we're going to do is we're going to delve a little deeper into Testng functionality, write some more tests, but really variations on the create wizard tests and the acceptance tests that we've written so far. So I've got the TestWizardry Java core project, and what I want to do with Git is I want to go to team and I want to pull. So I want to get to my latest branch, and it says it's got this scratchpad. I don't care about that file. Those are just kind of where I write whatever I need to in line to do a quick and dirty demonstration. Okay, pulling one with repository. Check out conflict, of course. Pull is canceled because there's a conflict. So what we will do is we're going to remove that from our repository for now. Push. Okay. It's probably going to complain about that too. Let's try pulling this again. Team, pull. No conflicts, please. I don't have time to mess with that. Okay, new head. All right. Uh-oh. Looks like it didn't. Okay. We've got the TestWizardry console. What is our error here? New acceptance letter cannot be resolved to a type. Is this that I didn't? All right, so I'm going to grab this from intro. So all right, I'm going to scrap the windows. Sorry about all that effort for bringing up the Windows VM and showing how to get it working because that one's in a weird state. So the reason I just wanted to do that is because on the Mac, I've made all these changes. And what I want to show is Testng. So like yesterday, I'm going to recreate stuff. With Testng, there's an easy way to run the test, right? If you have the Testng plugin, you can go ahead. It puts up this little indicator. I don't like how it looks like code, but it has run all, and you can run or debug a test. And you can see in the Testng plugin, it brings up the test results and gives us a nice report. Now, Testng also has a way to run tests through an XML file. And what I want to do is point that out. There's this Testng XML file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this, put it off screen, and I'm just going to wipe this file out and recreate it so that you can see how to do that. One easy thing you can do is you can just create this testng.xml file using any text editor. You can see it starts with an XML tag, says doc type suite, referencing the Testng DTD or document type definition. And then it just has XML suite, test, classes, and it shows how you group your tests. We're going to blow that away just because I wanted to show how you can recreate it. So in order to create a Testng XML file in Eclipse, if you have the Testng plugin, and if you remember, you got that plugin by going to Help Eclipse Marketplace and downloading the Testng plugin there. You can just click on your project, right-click on it. Oops, I missed. I hit Properties. What I want to go is to Testng. Now I can create a Testng class from here, and it'll just put it wherever in source test Java by default for my Maven project. And you see that creates just this little boilerplate. But that's not what I want to do. What I want to do is I want to, oops, go back to my project. Testng, I want to convert to Testng. This is a little bit of a misnomer since we're not converting. We've already got a Testng project, but we don't have a Testng XML, which is the hallmark. Just like a pom.xml is the hallmark of a Maven project, a Testng XML is the hallmark of a Testng suite. Now, there's nothing that says you need a Testng XML, but it provides several capabilities that you wouldn't get, for instance, if you're using JUnit. For example, the most obvious being, you see here, it automatically generates a suite or a hierarchical listing of tests. So each suite can have tests, they can have groups of tests, and you can do things like you can make one test dependent on another test. You can prioritize tests and say, run these tests first and these other tests later, which you might want to do if you have a long running test suite. And you want to get the first results first because they're more important. You might run your smoke tests first and your longer Selenium tests last, because you want to get quick results if there's something serious wrong. And you know, if your slower tests are done later, that's fine. So the first thing we notice is the Testng goes in your project root. By default, it will look for that. You can also specify different locations for that or break it up into different levels. But we'll just keep it in the root. And you can see it has a name for the suite. We can change this to TestWizardry unit tests, for example. We can call our test group or our test name. We can call these. Well, it looks like what we're doing is we're testing the different people, right? And let's, yeah, we'll just do that just to demonstrate how we can add a suite name and a test name. So suite name is TestWizardry unit tests, and the test group or the test itself is test person types. Let's go ahead and close this down. And then we've got our Testng XML. Now I've got these other tests that are not in the testing the person type. So what we can do is we can create another test, or we can even create another suite. But I'll just do it as a test. And I can say name equals Testng examples. And I'll go through these. Why is that giving me an error? Element types must match. Oh, I need a classes. Just a hierarchy thing. There we go. And we'll move down. Now these other ones, these Hogwarts acceptance tests, I'm going to look at those in a minute. I don't believe we covered data-driven tests yet, have we? I need to give this a name. These are the Hogwarts acceptance tests. All right, so let's just go ahead and talk a little bit about, well, let's remove this new test and go here to, we've got our Testng examples. What I want to do is show you different annotations, right? Annotation tests. All right. So we know from our past experience that if you put a test at test, And we'll call this a test. Now, what we'll do is we'll import test. So we'll just add this line, import org testng annotations. This is the annotation test, and it allows us to run the test. This test doesn't do anything, but it's a good start. We'll print. This is a test. Now it does something. Although technically it's not testing anything unless it asserts something. That's a reasonable assertion. 1 + 1 = 2. And then we'll add the import for assert true. We can run our test, and it passes. We run it again, it fails. Because 1 + 1 does not equal 2, or it does not equal 3, it equals 2. There we go. So you can have a test annotation. What we can then do is we can have, and I believe I showed this yesterday, we can have before method, and we can do some setup. For instance, say we have an integer called sum. All right, so we have a sum, and what we want to do is we want to see that 1 + 1 = sum. Well, what we want to do before this method, well, we want to assign a value to sum. Sum = 2. And we import before method, so we've got the before method annotation and the test annotation. And what I want to do is show we'll show that we're setting up the sum. We run our test again, and we see our output. It says set up, setting up sum. It's 0 at the start. Now, say we set our sum to 10 at the beginning of our class. It's going to say setting up sum is 10. But what we really want to know is what is the sum when our setup is complete. Or maybe we say setting up sum here, and then we run that again. Okay, setting up sum starts as, no, it's something same like 0. And sum is 2 afterwards, and it says this is a test. It passed. Now, if we change sum here in our before method, our setup, we run it again. And we get a fail. Sum = 3. So probably what we want is we want assert equals instead of true. We're going to include all of the assertions. And instead of doing 1 + 1 = sum, we want to say assert that 1 + 1 and the sum are equal. All right. This gives us a better error message. It says expected 3. This is our sum, but found 2. Apparently my math is bad. Now, we can also, just like before, create an after method that will run after every test. I'm duplicating myself. And what we want to do is we want sum to go back to 0. The idea being that after every test, we change the sum back to 0. And I may be jumping the gun. Oh, there's an error. I haven't included after method. There we go. Import after method annotation. So that will run before you. Do I have an error still? Oh, yeah, I still have 3. That's better. A test ran, it passed. 1 + 1 = 2. And we look at our console output. right? It says the setup sum of 0, tearing down test sum is 0 again. Now what I want to do is I want to create another test. So I'll create another test, and for lack of an imaginative name, I will call it another test. And maybe we do 4 minus 2 is the sum. We can run this and let's see what happens. So we get setting up sum. Sum is 2. This is a test. That works. Maybe what we should do is we should print out. I was going to say print out 1 plus 1 or something. Anyway, so this is a test, and then it's tearing down, and then it calls, or then it sets sum back to 0. We set up our sum as 0 again at the beginning of the test. This is another test, and we tear it down, and they both pass because 1 plus 1 and 4 minus 2 both equal 2. So what this is showing is that after method and before method run before and after each test. Now, what if we do this? We set our sum initially, which will happen at object creation when the class is created, and then we run it. In other words, we're not setting it in the before method. We get, for the first test, it passes, and then for another test, it says expected 0, but found 2. Well, why isn't this working after the method? Well, because it actually creates an instance of the class with each one. So that actually doesn't clean up this value. What we can do is not only do we have before method, but we have before class. And I'll call that init or initialize. I'm going to include that. Now, is this supposed to be static? I'm not sure. I'm going to search and find that out. And rather than mess with the sum over and over again, I'm just going to print these things so you can show the order they run in. So we can run this and we get, looking at it, we get running once, setting up test. This is a test, so it types running, or it runs the before class one time, and then it runs setting up test and tearing down test for each one. So setting up test, this is a test, tearing down test, setting up test, this is another test, tearing down test. And then just like we have before class, we can have after class. There we go. To expand that, whoa. Running once at n ran before. That's confusing. Oh, I typed before class again, not after class. And we need to import that. That's better. I hope that's better. Running once at end. So we've got here is our output. There's also methods you can add for before suite. Now, before class will run, let's add before suite. Just call it before suite. Same thing, there's an after suite. I won't bother putting that in. But now I can run this here, and it will say running before suite, and it runs at once. That doesn't show me much at all here, but if I go back to my package explorer and say I run all the tests here in Testng examples. Uh-oh, I've got some failing tests. Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that parameterized test because that will only run from Testng. So I'm just going to comment this whole thing out for now for this demonstration, and then I'll add it later. Going back here to Testng examples, run as Testng test. So we can see it did running before suite, and then it has these other tests, test 1 and test 2, which we'll look at in a minute. And they all ran fast. So let's look at that other file that's running with the test 1 and test 2. That's the test groups. Another thing you can do, besides annotating your tests with things that will execute before and after different stages of tests, are you can group your tests with an annotation. So you can put this test runs in group 1, this test runs in group 2, and they also run in a combined regression group. With Testng, you can specify running just one group or multiple groups, and you can specify that in your suite XML. I don't want to go through doing that. I just wanted to point out that as one of the features of Testng. And you can see here that when it runs them all together, it will only run the before suite once. If we add a before suite, if we add an after suite in this one, we'll do that. And we run all these tests. And we see that running once at end. All tests done. Wait, that didn't show up. All right, I'm baffled here. I ran it here at all tests in suite done. As opposed to running once before suite, I guess it just puts this output here, the tests run in the test. Now, with Testng, there's another layer. So it has method, right? For instance, this is a method here, this A test, or the test 1, or test 2, or another test. These are a single test method. A test class, the annotation test, or the test groups, those are a test class. Then it has a test suite, which is all the tests in a suite in the XML. And then it has a test. Test is actually a group of tests. And we can see that in here. We have a test, and it has multiple classes. So if we want to run our person tests. So you can specify to run the Hogwarts acceptance tests versus running all of them. Now, to run all of our tests in our Testng suite XML, we can right-click this on Eclipse, and we can run as Testng suite instead of Testng test. And we've got an error somewhere. It's a parsing error. And it looks like it's not referencing my XML file. This is not a useful error message. Can't find class in class path dot new test. Oh, that's the new test I deleted, right? Is that in here somewhere? Yeah. All right. Let's try that again. I'm going to Testng run as Testng suite. We've still got an error. Testng accepting and parameterized tests. I thought we removed that. Oh, it's complaining that it can't see that. So let's go ahead and comment that. You get to see an idiot at work today. All right, there we go. All right, so we can run all of the tests in our suite. And in our XML, we can group our tests. We can run just a single test. We can actually create multiple suites. Say I want to do another suite just for the examples. And I'll remove those from this suite. And let me see. So I'll create this second Testng XML. And then in the first one, we'll delete this suite. In the second one, we'll delete the other suite. So we're having two different groups of tests. One are our TestWizardry unit tests, and the other one are our examples. I forced a typo in there. Let's see how this one's doing. So now I can run the Testng, run this as a Testng suite. This will run all my real TestWizardry class, my person type test, my Hogwarts acceptance tests. Or I can run my Testng2, which only has my examples. Run as Testng suite. And we can see we've got Testng groups as a test. It calls it a test. It's a group of tests or a group of test classes, which may constitute a single test. This is a confusing part of Testng. And my parameterized test fails. It says parameter full name is required by before test. So let's go ahead into my parameterized tests. And I'll show you how to create a parameterized test. So let's just, I'm gonna comment that, right? So to start off, we've got name equals Harry Potter, right? Gender equals gender.male. Age equals 11. So we've got this example test. We'll just ignore the parameters for now. And no surprise, this is the same type of test we've been running all along. We can run this test. But what we want to do is we want to have, maybe we have a lot of different tests that use this and we don't want to set it up in the test. Maybe we want to set it up in our XML file. So let's go ahead and remove those. And by adding the parameters, this is what I do. I specify full name, gender, and age, and I pass those in this before test group. I can pass it in before method or before class as well. However I want to do that. And we've got some duplication here that can be removed. just so that those underlines don't distract me. So what we do is we do this name equals full name, this gender equals, well, we get the value of the string gender, and we get the age, and we set those all in our class properties so that they can be referenced in all of our different tests. Say we have a create muggle or something like that. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's do that later. But then what we need to do is in our XML, we need to specify some parameters. So within our test parameters, let's parameter, and then we give the name to full name, and we specify the value as Harry Potter. And then we can create another parameter. Name equals gender, value equals male, and parameter name equals age, value equals 11. Oh, and parameters need to go before the list of classes. I learned that when I was experimenting with it before. So I'm in my XML file, which doesn't need to be compiled. So I can create a library of tests and just allow you to modify the XML file, the Testng XML file. And by doing that, you can go ahead and change the age or the name or whatever in your tests to whatever other values you want. So you might actually create different tests, right? We might call this a Harry Potter test. And so we go here and we've got the full name, the gender, the age. Now, because this is dependent on the Testng, I can't just go ahead and click run all. That's where I got that error where it says full name is required by before test. Eclipse doesn't know how to parse that parameter out of the Testng XML. So the way we can run that is we can run it as Testng suite, and then we run through this and we get create witch or wizard. Which comes up as null, I guess. Oops. And let's go ahead and throw some debugging output in here. What do we get? Oh, age. It's an integer. Guess we got to run it as Testng suite. Okay, so we've got test 1 and 2, which are just static. We got Harry Potter, male, 11, created equals null. Interesting. That sure looks like the right gender. Oops, we gotta go back, run that as a suite. This is the difficult part. Because it requires run as Testng suite, we can't actually use our debugger here. Gender is null, male. Oh, well, I did something wrong here. I'm trying to compare these enums as if they were numbers. Gender. All right, that should do us better. So we got to do the dot equals method, and this is inherited from object. Gotta go back and run it as suite to pick up that information. Okay, gender is null. No, it's still null. If you guys see something I'm missing, I can appreciate it because now I'm baffled. You know what we can actually do? I'm just going to go simple here and ignore my gender enum. And if I'm going to do if it equals ignore case male. Oh, is there we go. Cut and paste. All right. Go back, run this as suite. Male. Create null. Maybe I've got something wrong in my XML, but it's getting the value. I hope you guys are having fun laughing at me right now. I do not know. I'm saying if it's male, create a wizard. And then I'm saying, go ahead now, if it's female, turn it into a female. If it's not a female, well, create it as null. So I forgot an else. Because I had two if statements in a row, it executes the one, and then it executes the second, regardless of whether it executes the first. Let that be a lesson to you. Don't be as stupid as I am, or at least not while you're recording a video. All right. There we go. Harry is an 11-year-old wizard. All tests in suite done. All right. So now I've got my parameterized test, and I can probably, well, I don't even need to worry about that. So I'm going to ignore the gender for now, and I'm going to go back over here to my XML file. Now, let's remove this. Let's rename this file. Refactor, rename as parameterized person tests, sure. And now, without editing my test code at all, I can create a new test, and I can create it in an XML file. I could even create a user interface or a data file that parses into an XML file. And what I can do, all I'm doing is copying the Harry Potter test. I'm going to make it a Hermione test. I'm going to change the name here in the XML. I'm going to change her to a female. And now what I've done is I have a data-driven test that I can create many different tests. What's one of Ron's older brothers? Anyone? Ron Weasley's older brother. I'll ask the internet. Fred and George. Let's call this a Fred and George test. Fred Weasley test. I'll change it to Fred. Oops. Male. Oh, even better. You know what? Let's stick with our Jenny Weasley test because this will test something else. Jenny Weasley is a female, but she's only 10, which means she won't get into Hogwarts. So we throw in our Jenny Weasley test and we run this suite again. And we now have 3 tests. We have the Harry Potter test, which passes. We have the Hermione test, which passes, and the Jenny Weasley test, which also passes. Now we've got all these tests set up in our Testng XML file. We can add, remove, or change them as needed. Say everyone goes on to the next year and we make them 12 years old, whatever. But then we can go ahead, we can create another test and use the same data. And we can call it our acceptance test. We'll call it a Hogwarts acceptance test. Accepted to Hogwarts test, we'll call it. Got some errors. Annotation test is disallowed for, oh, I'm inside another test or something. No. Oh, I'm missing some parentheses. Come on, guys. You can help me with that. So what we want to do is we want to do school is Hogwarts. We want to create an instance of Hogwarts, new Hogwarts. We're going to have to import those things. Import Hogwarts and import school. You can see up at the top in our imports, it added school and Hogwarts. It just kind of alphabetizes them. And then we can do Hogwarts dot accept. Got to learn to spell. Admit. And it expects a person. So what I want to do is let me make this a dependent test. So this is another thing we use is we can make this test depend on create witch or wizard. And we put it in parentheses. Got a duplication there for my cut and paste. Okay, so what we're saying is this accepted to Hogwarts test won't run until create witch or wizard runs. So we will move that up and we'll put our person outside the individual test method so that it's created in each one. And we can actually go ahead and move, well, for this illustration, I was going to say we could remove the create into the before test method, but we don't want to do that because we want to demonstrate the dependency. So what we want to do is we want to admit the person. Oh, and then I believe that returns Boolean, right? Yeah, so it returns whether they're admitted or not. And we want to assert equals that admitted is true. We'll add that import. Okay, and I think that's good. We can run an individual test, but we're dependent on these parameters, so we technically can't run it individually. But what we're doing is we're creating the Witcher wizard as a test, and since we need a Witcher wizard, rather than creating it again, we're just making the second test to depend on it, this accepted test. All right, we'll go back over here, and because we're using our suite XML to pass in our parameters, we need to run as a suite. And now we've got extra tests, right? We've got acceptance tests, we've got the parameters, and without doing anything else, we now have 3 new tests by writing the one test method, which was frankly pretty easy once you get past my stupid typos and whatnot. So we've got an accepted to Hogwarts. We see the Harry Potter test that passed, for the Hermione test that passed, and for the Jenny Weasley test that failed. Well, that's because Jenny is 10. We go in and in our XML, we say, well, this is what's the second one? Order of the Phoenix, or no, it's Secret Chamber. Harry Potter in the Secret Chamber. Jenny turns 11. She gets to go to Hogwarts. Harry, Ron, and Hermione are now second year. And of course, Jenny finds Tom Riddle's journal, and spoiler alert, Voldemort is Tom Riddle. We run this test again, and ooh, now Jenny is accepted, but of course, Harry and Hermione can't be accepted. They're 12 years old. They've already been accepted. What we might do in the future is, if a student has been accepted and they try to apply again, rather than just saying you're not accepted, say the Hogwarts would keep track of a list of their students enrolled and say, you're already enrolled, you don't need to reapply, instead of just failing. But this is a simple scenario, and that's how we do it. So we've got the parameterized test, which is pretty cool. We can even take it to one more level. And since I got a late start and I've fumbled through this, I'm just going to briefly show you how it exists. And that is using a data provider. Rather than parameters in my Testng XML, I can create a data provider. Now, a data provider can read from a file. It can get information over the network, which is kind of cool. It can call an API. It could even be a Selenium test, which scrapes the Harry Potter wiki to get some information. But in this case, our data provider is a method, and what it does is it returns an array of objects. In other words, it returns a 2-dimensional array. And what we do here is we define, we're defining a bunch of witches and wizards and normal people here, I guess. So we're creating new wizards, new witches. We're creating Albus Dumbledore, who is too old, so he's rejected from Hogwarts, and we're sending our expected value. Harry should be admitted, Hermione should be admitted, Jenny should be rejected for being too young. Albus Dumbledore, Professor Dumbledore, when he tries to apply again, they say you're too old. I don't know his actual age. We'll look it up in the wiki. And Dudley and me, well, we're both rejected on account of we're muggles or not real people. At least I'm not a real person in the Hogwarts universe. So there's 2 ways we can go about this, right? I can create these people here in my test, and I can use each person in the test. But I don't want to do that. So I'm going to comment that out, And this, when I comment something out, you can see it turns green. The compiler actually ignores this. As far as Java is concerned, these lines of code don't exist. It sees them as blank when it's a comment. But comments are used for two things. Number one, you can write a comment and say, this test will run for every person in the, we'll call it the database, in the data provider. Right, I'm creating these here, but I could just as easily get this list of people from a database, right? If you know SQL, I could do select star from people where, well, we can just do select star from people. And then we could map that to creating new wizards classes and so forth. So all I'm doing here is, though, as I'm creating wizards and witches, I could pass in name and age and everything separately and generate that separately. But why do that? I can handle that here. So I create all these. This is like creating a bunch of different parameters, and I can add a new person here in code just as easily by putting someone else's name. Anyway, I was going to put my wife in there, but if I put her age on the internet, she'd probably be furious. Anyway, and then our test, really, it looks very much like our parameterized test. It says admit and assert equals admitted equals whatever. In this case, I'm doing assert equals that Hogwarts admit equals the expected. Just like in our parameterized test, in this case, it's doing it in the setup method. It's passing this information. I could do the same thing, but when I wrote the data-driven or the data provider test, in the actual test, I specify data provider instead of parameters. And I specify the method name, that's here, or the data provider name. I could do the default data provider name is the name of the method. I specify my data provider name, which is people up here. So data provider equals people means that it will call this method. You can also specify a separate class where you get your data provider, which might, make a database call or a network call or read from an Excel file or however you want to do that. So the data provider test. Now, the nice thing about doing this instead of a suite is it doesn't depend on your suite XML. So I can run this test and it runs all of these tests at once. It runs this simple Hogwarts admittance test with the expected admittance, which is this admit reject. You can see I define these rather than just using true or false, which would work just as fine. Right, I could specify true here, and that works the same. But true equals admit. Just makes it a little easier to read when I type admit or reject. So the expected is that they're admitted, true, except in the case of all these other guys that are not. So I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Is that 7? I can't. 6 lines. So I have 6 tests, and by just adding another line in my annotation, or even in an external file or a database or what have you, I can test all these people get admitted to Hogwarts, and it runs really quick. And I can add another test and use this data provider in another test. So that's about it for today. We'll go ahead and end the session, and I'll pause the recording. And well, before we pause, does anyone have any questions or comments? No? All right.
I
know
no comment from me.
Okay. I ran through that data provider pretty quick at the end, but this code is in the test repository. I encourage you to work on checking it out, even forking it and writing your own. If you would like an assignment, I would look at the parameterized test, which isn't checked in yet, and the data-driven test, and try and add or modify your own parameters, or create new test methods that use the parameters and see how easy it is to create a large number of tests using varied data. And that's a real world scenario that your data is always going to be changing. Right? There's two things that are going to change. One is your data, your inputs and outputs, and the other thing is your functionality. Well, it's harder to change your functionality, but it's easier to cover a wide variety of functionality, right? We're testing here in the data-driven test a lot of different scenarios. We're testing a wizard can be admitted, a witch can be admitted, a witch who's too young will be rejected, a wizard who's too old will be rejected, a muggle will be rejected, and a person who's neither a muggle nor a wizard will also be rejected. That would probably be easier if I specified my age as 11 to eliminate that as a variable. But anyway, the downside to doing it this way, to doing a data-driven test, as opposed to we hop back into our wizard tests, right? No, wait. I guess, oh yeah, here we go. I've got a specific test that says it should accept a wizard, it should reject a muggle, it should reject wizards that are too old, it should reject witches that are too young, should accept witches, etc. The nice thing about doing it this way is when I run this test, it's very clear what the test name is and what it's testing. So there's a trade-off. A data provider test allows you to create lots of variations on the data to test different scenarios rapidly, but you lose that ability to have the test name that describes, should reject muggles, for instance. That's a trade-off. There's things you can do. For instance, there's no reason your data provider couldn't also pass a comment that says what it's testing, and you could add that to your reports to make it easier. Just adds a little bit more complexity to your data provider. But I hope this was useful, and I hope you've enjoyed this course so far. Now I'm going to take a couple weeks break while I'm going to be doing a commercial training, and then I'm going to revamp the course, and we're going to start stage 2 in November, where we will essentially take this login and take it up through the sorting hat, where you're accepted and assigned to your house, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, or Hufflepuff, and we will build a simple web app and test it using Selenium. Will be the stage 2 of this course that we start in November. So take care, everyone. Have a good weekend, and I will be in touch in a couple weeks once I have the new course ready to go through.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, well, just one thing I was going to ask.
Yes.
Could you give an example of, say, in the resources folder, you'd add an XML or a CSV file, and you'd call that instead of like to parse the parameters rather than
I got you.
having the, yeah.
So I could do that. So what I'll do is I'll create a people.json file, and I'm not going to have time to what's going on here? Editor is available on the marketplace. Okay. But yeah, I could create a CSV, a JSON, an XML file in the resources folder and get that and use that as a data provider. I will include an example doing that. But obviously we don't have time today. Look for it in the repository.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that.
All right. We'll see you guys later.
Thanks, Aaron.